You feel it more than hear it. A long, grinding shudder somewhere far below, like the ship dragging its keel over gravel. Up top they're laughing. Someone kicks a chunk of ice across the deck like a toy. You're in third class, near the waterline, and you'll be one of the last to be told what that sound was. The ship you were promised could not sink has just been opened to the sea along 300 feet of her hull. From this moment, you have 2 hours and 40 minutes, water that kills in minutes, and lifeboats for barely half the souls aboard. Where you are standing right now decides almost everything. It's 11:40 at night on the 14th of April, 1912. The RMS Titanic, the largest moving object ever built by human hands, has just struck an iceberg in the North Atlantic. By about 2:20 in the morning, she will be gone. That is your entire timeline. 2 hours and 40 minutes from the shudder to the silence. And almost everything that happens in those 160 minutes, who lives and who dies, is decided not by heroism or luck alone, but by physics, by geography, and by a series of human choices, some made years before you ever stepped aboard. Start with the word that killed people. Unsinkable. The Titanic was not magic. She was a number. Her hull was divided into watertight compartments, and she was designed to stay afloat with up to 4 of them flooded. 4. It was a genuinely impressive piece of engineering, and it bred a fatal confidence. But the iceberg didn't punch one clean hole. It buckled and split the hull along its side, opening up 6 of those compartments to the sea. She could float with 4 flooded, not 6. The moment that ice scraped past, the math was already finished. The unsinkable ship was, from that second, a ship that was certainly going to sink. Everyone aboard just had 2 hours and 40 minutes before the rest of them found out. Now the cruelest number of all, the lifeboats. The Titanic carried 20 lifeboats, with a total capacity of around 1,178 people. There were about 2,200 people aboard. Do that subtraction and feel it land. Even if every single lifeboat launched perfectly, packed to the last seat, lowered without a hitch, more than 1,000 people were always going to be left on that deck. The shortage wasn't bad luck on the night. It was built into the ship before she ever left the dock. The boats met the regulations of the time. The regulations were catastrophically wrong. And so the deepest decision about who would live was made by men in an office, long before the iceberg. And the ship will tell you, precisely, how long you have, if you can read her. As the bow fills with water, she begins to tilt, nose down, by the head. That angle is a clock. A slight tilt early on, almost imperceptible, the crew still reassuring everyone. Then steeper. Then the forward decks sliding under, the angle growing, the stern beginning to rise. An experienced eye could read the rate of that tilt and know, roughly, how many minutes were left. A dying ship counts down out loud, in degrees, for anyone calm enough to look. But whether you can even get to a boat depends on something you chose before you ever felt the shudder. Your ticket. On the Titanic, class was a map to the lifeboats. First-class cabins and the boat deck were the same world, steps apart, wide stairs and open promenades leading straight to where the boats hung. Third class was a maze, deep in the ship, near the waterline, a warren of narrow corridors, unfamiliar passages, and in places, barriers and gates separating the lower decks from the upper. Even with the best will in the world, simply finding your way up from third class to the boat deck, through a ship you'd never been allowed to explore, in the dark, as it flooded, was a survival challenge that first-class passengers never faced. Geography was fate, and your geography was set the day you bought the cheapest ticket you could afford. Up on the boat deck, another rule was deciding lives. Women and children first. In some places it worked, and women and children were loaded and lowered to safety. In others it became a trap of its own, officers reading the order so strictly that they launched boats while men stood back and, in some cases, while seats sat empty, because no more women were immediately in line. It was an agonizing, imperfect, human thing, applied unevenly across a chaotic deck, and where you happened to be standing, and which officer was in charge of which boat, mattered enormously. And down in third class, the fight was different and harder. Many of the passengers there were immigrants chasing a new life, some who spoke little English, housed in the part of the ship furthest from the boats and least familiar to them. Stewards did their best in places, leading groups up through the maze, but there were locked gates and confused crew, and corridors already filling with freezing seawater. Some found their way up and lived. Many never found it at all, or found it far too late, after the boats had already pulled away. It was not, for the most part, a single cruel hand holding them down. It was distance and language, and a ship designed so that the people who had paid the least were berthed the deepest inside it, with the longest, darkest, most confusing climb to the only way out. By the time the danger was undeniable, the geography had already quietly decided too many of their fates. That is the real horror of the class divide that night. No villain was required. The layout did the work. Put it in the starkest terms the records allow. If you were a woman in first class, your odds were extraordinary. The overwhelming majority lived. If you were a man in third class, the night was very nearly a death sentence. Same ship, same iceberg, same 2 hours and 40 minutes, and survival sorted almost as cleanly by the deck you slept on as by anything you did once the alarm was raised. The iceberg was indifferent. The ship was not. Which brings us to the detail that haunts this story most. The half-empty boats. Some lifeboats were lowered with empty seats. Not because of cruelty, but because of fear and confusion. The crew wasn't certain the boats could be safely lowered fully loaded without buckling, so some went down partly filled. The very first boat to leave had a capacity of 65 and went into the water with around 28 people in it. Do the arithmetic across the night, and it means that hundreds of the people who died that night had a seat available. There was room. The shortage of boats was a sin of the shipbuilders. The empty seats were a tragedy of the night itself, survivable deaths that simply did not have to happen. And if you don't make a boat, the ocean is waiting, and the ocean is the real killer here. The water that night was about -2 degrees Celsius, below the normal freezing point of fresh water, kept liquid by its salt. People imagine the danger as drowning, as swimming to a distant boat. That is a myth. There is a rule for water this cold, and it's called 1-10-1. About 1 minute of cold shock, when you hit the water and your body convulses, gasping, fighting just to control your own breathing. About 10 minutes of meaningful movement, before your hands and arms stop obeying you as the cold shuts your muscles down. And about 1 hour before you lose consciousness from hypothermia. For almost everyone who went into that water, the end came not in an hour, but in minutes. They didn't drown. The cold simply switched them off. And in the middle of all of this, there is the detail that turns tragedy into something close to unbearable. Another ship was right there. The SS Californian had stopped for the night just a few miles away, close enough that some aboard the Titanic could see her lights on the horizon, close enough that the Titanic fired distress rockets into the sky, trying to wake her. But the Californian's single wireless operator had finished his shift and gone to bed. The radio sat silent. The distress calls flew out across the water, and there was no one listening on the one ship near enough to have saved nearly everyone. Instead, salvation came from the Carpathia, more than 50 miles away, which caught the calls and ran full speed through the same ice field that had killed the Titanic for about 4 hours to reach the survivors at dawn. The closest ship slept. The far ship raced. That gap is the whole, agonizing difference. So picture the dawn. Survivors huddled in wooden boats on a flat gray sea dotted with ice, watching the Carpathia's lights grow closer, around 705 people out of roughly 2,200. About 1,500 did not live to see that ship, and the survival did not fall evenly. Roughly 62% of first-class passengers lived. Only about a quarter of third class did. The number you were born into, the ticket you could afford, the deck you slept on, all of it pressed its thumb on the scale in the dark. But here's why your death was not the end of the story. The world looked hard at those 1,500 lost lives, and, for once, it changed. Out of this disaster came the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, SALAS, in 1914. Lifeboats for every single soul aboard. No exceptions, no more boats for half. A requirement for a 24-hour radio watch, so that no ship near enough to help would ever again be asleep at the quay. And the International Ice Patrol, which to this day still tracks the icebergs across that same crossing, a permanent watch born from one night of ice. Every passenger on every ship that has sailed since you went down has had a seat, and a listening radio, and a watcher on the ice, because of what happened to you. So here's what you carry up from the cold. Read the tilt of whatever ship you're on, the real one or the metaphor, because a sinking thing tells you how long you have if you're calm enough to look. Know that the disaster was written into the design long before the iceberg in the count of the boats. Know that the cold water lies about how much time it gives you. And know the strange, hard hope underneath it all. You did not get enough boats. Every passenger since has, because of you. The sea got safer the only way it ever does, by remembering, exactly and forever, how it took you. Keep the fire. Keep moving.